Wings of the Fallen Dragon Queen, written by Short Story Queen. Chapter 1. The Storm in the Castle. The wind came first, keening across the broken spines of the northern cliffs, dragging salt and grit through the blackening sky. It howled like something wounded and ancient, tearing at cloaks and whipping loose leather straps against armored thighs. The riders pressed forward into its fury, their mounts uneasy beneath them, the sea snarling far below. Kyle Varine rode at the front, as always, silent against the storm, his eyes narrowed to slits under his hood. He knew this land had been cursed long before his boots ever touched its soil. When the castle emerged through the haze, gray, gaunt, bleeding ivy from its wounds, no one spoke. The ruins were half swallowed by the cliff's edge, its towers broken and walls bowed like ribs after a hard blow. Something about it twisted the gut, but none of them dared admit it. They had nowhere else to go. Kale dismounted first. His boots sank into the wet moss at the threshold. The gate had long since rotted away, leaving only rusted hinges and the carcass of a portcullis tangled in weeds. As the others fanned out behind him, Wren muttering to himself, Elin tightening her pack, Kale stepped inside. He didn't draw his sword, but his fingers hovered close to it. Even ruin could be dangerous. The castle was silent. Not dead. Not empty. Just waiting. Inside, shadows gathered in thick layers. Rain dripped through a hole in the ceiling above the grand hall, forming a pool on cracked marble. Old banners hung in tatters, their sigils faded beyond meaning. And on the far side of the room, beside a cold hearth, someone stood watching them. She did not move when they entered. Her figure was still as stone, framed by the broken light slanting through the wreckage. She wore no crown, no armor, just a long black gown, the fabric threadbare at the hem and soaked near the sleeves. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, black streaked with what might have been copper in better light. Her eyes met Kale's, and the first flicker of unease stirred beneath his ribs. Not fear. Not yet. Just recognition. As if he had seen her once, long ago, in some half-forgotten dream steeped in ash and gold. "You've come late," she said, her voice low and calm, as if they were expected guests rather than trespassers. "The storm's nearly here." Kyle tilted his head. "Didn't know we were invited." "You weren't." Behind him, Elin shifted uneasily. Wren, ever the watcher, said nothing, but Kyle felt the change in the air, the scent of something not quite human, burned metal, rain on scorched stone. He stepped forward. "You live here?" "I remain," she answered, eyes flicking briefly toward the shattered stained glass behind them. "Living is a matter of perspective." Kale's hand dropped from his sword. There was no danger here, not in the obvious sense. Just a strange woman in a dying castle. He'd seen worse in better places. Still, something about the way she stood unnerved him. She held herself like a queen before a throne, and her gaze, steady, ancient, unflinching, was too deliberate for madness. They stayed the night, not because they trusted her, but because the wind screamed louder after sunset, and the rain came in sheets like knives. The castle had few intact rooms, but Sarastra, though she did not yet give her name, led them to a chamber where the walls still held. Kyle sat apart from the others, back to a pillar, watching her from the shadows. She moved through the ruins like she had never left them, her fingers trailing over cold stone, lips whispering things he could not hear. She did not eat. She did not sleep. When she sat by the hearth, it was not for warmth, but to be near something remembered. He did not ask her story that night. He told himself he didn't care. But when the others slept, when the fire sank low, she looked up and met his eyes again, and did not look away. The silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Her gaze dropped once, to his scarred hands, then back to his face, her expression unreadable. Kale exhaled slowly and turned away. The storm did not break, it thickened. The second night, one of the horses went mad. No reason, no warning. It screamed and kicked and tore loose, plunging over the edge into the sea below. Elin wept, not for the beast, but for the omen. On the third night, the bones began to whisper. It was Elin who heard them first, whimpering in her sleep, muttering about wings in the dark and voices speaking in a tongue older than flame. Ren dismissed it as fever, but Kyle did not sleep. He found Sarastra in the ruins of what might have once been a library, kneeling before a shattered mosaic. Her hands were pressed to the floor, her hair spilling forward to veil her face. "You're not mad," he said quietly. "No," she whispered. "Not yet." He stepped closer, studying the mosaic. It had once shown a dragon in flight. Obsidian wings spread across a field of stars. Its head was missing now, shattered by time or something worse. She looked up at him, her face pale in the half-light. "Do you believe in Queen's mercenary?" He shrugged. "I believe in coin. And monsters." A faint smile touched her mouth, bitter and strange. "Then you'll believe in me soon enough." That night, something moved in the lower halls. Kyle went after it with his blade drawn, the others trailing behind him. But what they found was not an enemy. It was a thing twisted by magic, a corpse given breath and purpose, crawling with hunger and heat. It turned its face toward Sarastra and hissed in a voice that should not have survived death. "Traitor." She did not flinch. She raised her hand, and the stones beneath her feet pulsed red. Fire answered her call, not in a blaze but in a slow rising glow, the kind that simmers in the belly of mountains. The thing burned from the inside out. When it fell, Kyle turned to her slowly. Breath caught in his throat. Her hand trembled, her eyes glowed faintly. For the first time she looked afraid, not of the thing she'd destroyed, but of herself. "I wasn't ready," she murmured. "It's too soon." Kyle stepped closer. He could feel the heat still rising from her skin. A strange scent clung to her, like air after lightning. Their faces were inches apart now, and she didn't move away. The air between them crackled. Her eyes dropped to his mouth, just once, before she stepped back. He didn't stop her, but he didn't look away. As she turned and walked into the dark, he found his chest tight with something unfamiliar. Not lust and not fear, recognition again, and something sharper beneath it. The storm outside had quieted, but inside the ruined castle something far older had begun to wake. Chapter 2. Fire beneath the skin. Morning came reluctantly, dragging a gray light over the broken stones of Kelthorn. The storm had emptied itself during the night, leaving the world soaked and heavy. Kale had not slept. He had watched the slow dying of the fire, listened to the uneasy breaths of his crew, and every so often, to the faint steps of the woman who moved like a shadow through her own ruin. By dawn she was gone. He found her in the courtyard standing barefoot on the slick stones, eyes closed, hair tangled by the wind. Mist clung to her like a second skin. The rain had carved shallow rivulets along the cracks in the courtyard floor, turning the fallen leaves into dark stains. Kyle watched her a long time before she spoke. "You stayed awake," she said, still not turning. "I don't sleep easily." "Nor do I." She opened her eyes then, gold beneath the fog. There was something in them that unsettled him again, something vast and contained, like the edge of a fire that never burned out. He wanted to ask her who she really was, what she meant by the power he had seen the night before, but the words caught in his throat. Instead he said, "You nearly burned yourself alive last night." A faint, humorless curve touched her lips. If only it were that simple. She turned away, walking toward the old stone well at the far end of the yard. The hem of her dress dragged through puddles, the fabric clinging to her legs. Kyle followed, silent. The wind had gone still, and in that stillness, the sound of their footsteps echoed too loud, too intimate. At the well, she leaned against the worn rim, fingers tracing the carvings that ringed it, old sigils, worn smooth by time. Her voice was quieter when she spoke again. There was a time when fire obeyed me, when it knew my name. She glanced at him, not expecting belief, not asking for it. Now it eats me instead. Cale's hand twitched at his side. He was not a man given to gentleness, yet something in the rawness of her tone struck deep. He remembered the creature from the night before, the way she had faced it without flinching, the light that had flared beneath her skin. If that's true, he said finally, then you should stay away from me. Her eyes met his, sharp, unreadable. And yet you follow. He did not answer. He couldn't. They spent the day searching the lower chambers for supplies. The castle was a labyrinth of corridors that led nowhere, stairways ending in air. The others moved cautiously, their unease growing with each new discovery. Rooms thick with ash, old chains fused into stone, walls that seemed to breathe when no one looked directly at them. Cale stayed near Sarastra, not to protect her, he told himself that, but because the space between them felt charged, like standing too close to lightning. She moved with eerie grace, her fingertips gliding over the relics of her past life. In the half-light, he caught glimpses of who she might have been, a woman born of fire and command, her will forged by centuries. But now she seemed caught between worlds, her power buried under flesh that trembled when she thought no one saw. Once, as they crossed the great hall again, her foot caught on the broken edge of a flagstone. Kyle reached her before she fell. His hands closed around her arms, steadying her. The contact burned, skin against skin, heat flaring between them before either could draw breath. She looked up, startled, and he saw the faint pulse at her throat, the quickness of it, the effort she made to pull away slowly, not too fast, as if denying what both had felt. He let go first, and they said nothing for the rest of the day. But something between them had shifted, an awareness that made every glance longer, every silence heavier. By nightfall, the mist had thickened again. The crew gathered around the hearth in uneasy quiet. Kyle sat apart, sharpening his blade, though there was no need. The rhythm of the motion steadied him. He could feel her eyes on him now and then, the weight of them brushing his skin like invisible heat. When the first scream tore through the air, it came from the outer corridor. Ren was on his feet instantly. Kyle reached the door in 3 strides, but Sarastra was already ahead of him. They found Elin standing in the hall, white-faced, her lamp trembling in her hand. Something had moved beyond the doorway ahead, something that scraped along the walls, dragging claws over stone. The air was colder now, thick, with a stench of decay. Kale signaled the others to stay back and stepped forward, sword drawn, but Sarastra moved past him before he could stop her. "Don't," he said under his breath. "It comes for me," she replied softly. "It always does." The shadow lunged. Kyle saw it only in fragments, a blur of bone and smoke, a mouth too wide for any living thing. He swung his blade, caught nothing. The creature struck her, hurling her against the wall. The sound it made was not a roar, but a word. Her name, drawn out and distorted, spoken through centuries of rot. Sarastra pushed herself upright. Blood ran from her temple, bright against her pale skin. The creature lunged again, and this time she did not move aside. "Enough," she whispered. The floor shuddered beneath her feet. The stones cracked, light seeping through the fractures in dull, molten threads. Her hands lifted, fingers trembling. For a heartbeat, Kale saw it, the glow beneath her skin, a faint shimmer of scales that vanished as quickly as it came. Then fire erupted, not from her hands, but from within her, as though her body were a vessel breaking open. The creature screamed as it burned, its form unraveling into smoke and sparks. When it was gone, silence fell again, thick, absolute. Sarastra stood motionless. The fire in her eyes dimmed, and she swayed. Kyle caught her before she fell, his arms closing around her without thought. Her skin was searing hot, her breath shallow. "Too soon," she whispered again, barely audible. "I can't hold it." He pulled her against him, feeling the tremor in her body, the uneven rhythm of her breathing. For a long moment, neither moved. The scent of burned air hung between them, mingled with something faintly metallic, faintly human. When her eyes opened, she met his gaze from inches away. Whatever armor he wore inside himself cracked then, quietly, without sound. "You're no queen," he said softly. "You're something else." Her mouth curved, almost a smile, and then she fainted in his arms. He carried her back to the firelight, the others watching in stunned silence. Her skin was still too warm, her pulse wild beneath his fingers. He laid her down carefully, brushing damp hair from her face, and for a moment, he forgot the curse she claimed. The fire, the danger. He saw only the woman, fragile and fierce, lying against the stone floor with her breath shivering like a secret. Outside, the storm gathered once more along the cliffs, the castle side, and somewhere deep below the bones whispered again. Cale did not sleep that night. He stayed beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the low hum of the fire and wondering when he had stopped wanting to leave. Chapter 3. The Pact of Bone and Ash. By morning, the castle felt different. Not lighter. Nothing in Calethorn could ever be called that, but charged, like the air before lightning touches the earth. The corridors no longer felt empty, but as though they watched. The stones pulsed with memory, the kind that stirred under skin and whispered just beneath the threshold of thought. Sarastra had not stirred from where Cale had laid her. She slept with her face turned toward the fire, a flush of heat still ghosting her skin, her breathing shallow but steady. Her lips moved now and then, murmuring things in a language none of the others recognized. He didn't wake her. Whatever dreams she wandered through were hers to survive. Cale sat near her, boots planted wide, his sword resting across his lap, though it felt ridiculous now. Metal against whatever it was that burned in her. There had been no sign of another creature since the night before. No claw marks, no trace of the thing that had come for her. Just the faint scorch marks etched into the stones, curling like vines, the remnants of her fire sealed into the floor. Ren came once, crouched beside her, touched her wrist with careful fingers. "She's not dying," he said, though his voice lacked its usual surety. "But her pulse is strange, not human, not sick, just old." Cale didn't respond, he already knew. She woke as dusk began to fall, when the sky turned the color of blood behind the broken arches. Her eyes opened slowly, and the first thing they saw was him. "I didn't mean to show you that," she said. Kyle leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You didn't have a choice." "I always have a choice," she murmured, and for the first time her voice sounded small. "Mortal." He said nothing to that, just held her gaze, letting the silence stretch between them, until she sat up with a soft sound of effort, and the spell of vulnerability slipped away like mist in heat. The others kept their distance. Elin avoided looking at her altogether. Ren, curious despite himself, watched her like a man studying a dangerous remedy. 1 part cure, 9 parts death. No one questioned what she was anymore. No one wanted to. That night, Sarastra stood before them, no longer a shadow but something sharper. Her shoulders were back, her face unflinching, her eyes burning with purpose again. "I won't survive another outburst like that," she said. "Not unbound, not alone. What I am, what I was. It's trapped beneath this skin, but there are ways to reclaim it. 3 relics, old things, fragments of what they took from me when I fell. If I gather them, I can unseal what remains of my power, and with it, take back what was stolen." Cale watched her as she spoke. The others looked to him. It had already become a pattern, her words, his reaction, their response. Without meaning to, they had all begun to orbit her. She met his gaze. "I'll pay you whatever you want." He didn't answer at first, the offer was too easy. too transactional for what had already passed between them. She knew it. He could see the tightness at her throat, the flicker in her expression that betrayed the part of her still uncertain. He would say yes. Kyle stood, the weight of his blade still slung across his back, the feel of her fire still marked faintly on his palms. "We do it my way," he said. "No secrets. No more disappearing." Her chin lifted. "I don't disappear. I protect." "Same thing," he said and walked past her. But as he brushed her shoulder, she didn't step away. She tilted her head just enough that the edge of her hair brushed his neck, and for a single breathless second, neither of them moved. It was nothing. It was everything. The journey began at sunrise, and they traveled light. Only what they could carry. The castle sank behind them into the mists like a vanished memory. The path ahead wound through forgotten woods and scarred hills, places the wars had left behind. The air was thick with silence. No birds, no wind. Only the steady rhythm of hooves, the rustle of gear, and the distance closing between Kyle and the woman who had once ruled fire. The first night they camped beneath a crumbling aqueduct veiled in ivy. Sarastra sat apart, her knees drawn to her chest, staring into the coals of the fire. Kale watched her from the other side, the flicker of flame painting her skin in gold and shadow. She had changed. He could see it in the way she moved, more deliberate now, like someone reacquainting herself with weight and shape. The human shell no longer seemed to fit. When he rose and crossed the camp to her side, she didn't look up. But she knew. "It'll get worse, Granny," she said. "Before it gets better. The relics are tied to old places, and those places remember me. You're not afraid." "I am," she said quietly. "But fear isn't new." Kale crouched beside her, their knees nearly touching. He could feel the heat radiating off her skin again, though she showed no signs of discomfort. Her body burned gently as if something deep inside her had never cooled. That warmth reached toward him now, invisible, pulling at something in his chest he didn't want to name. "Why do you still trust me?" he asked. "I don't," she said without hesitation. "But I trust what I see in you, and what I see is a man trying very hard not to be anything more than steel." His jaw tensed. She smiled faintly and turned to him. Her eyes caught the firelight like polished metal. "You're more dangerous than you think, Kale Vurin. Not because of what you can kill, but because of what you protect when you forget to be afraid." He meant to push her away then, with words if not hands. Meant to say something cruel and final that would slam the door she kept cracking open. But she leaned forward slightly, and he felt her breath brush his neck warmer than the fire, scented like some long-dead flower. "I don't need you to want me," she said, "but I see how you look at me when you think I'm not watching." He didn't move. Not even when her fingers grazed the edge of his wrist. Not even when her eyes lingered on his mouth again, as if debating something older than propriety. But she pulled back before the air could break. She turned from him with no sound, no regret. Kale sat in the warmth she left behind and let the night close in around him. The fire crackled. The stars hid. And somewhere in the blackness beyond the trees, the first relic began to call. Chapter 4. Teeth of the Past. The forest held its breath as they entered. No birds called, no wind stirred. Only the hush of old trees watching with bark-thick patience, their twisted roots clawing at the soil like forgotten bones. Mist moved between trunks slow and low, never lifting above the knees, as if the land itself refused to let go of what had died here. Kale rode at the front, his fingers resting lightly on the reins, his other hand never straying far from the hilt strapped across his back. His eyes scanned the silence, but it wasn't the absence of movement that kept his attention sharpened. It was her. Sarastra rode beside him, her posture straight, gaze fixed ahead, but her skin had gone paler the deeper they pressed into the woods. There was a set to her jaw, a faint tension in her throat, like something inside her was holding itself too tightly, bracing for impact. The fire beneath her skin didn't glow now, but he could feel it anyway, It radiated off her in waves, not heat this time, but a strange kind of pressure, like the calm before a quake. He knew the forest by name, Vareth's Hollow. Stories said it had once been the site of a great burning where dragons laid waste to a rebellion, and the trees that grew back afterward refused to let light in. Most soldiers avoided the place, too many missing patrols, too many bones half swallowed by moss. She said nothing of it, not even when the path narrowed and the air thickened with rot. But her hands curled a little tighter on the leather reins, and her breath shortened with each step. He saw it, and he didn't press her. By dusk they reached the ruined temple, or what remained of it. Shattered columns jutted from the earth like broken teeth, overgrown with vines that bloomed white despite the lack of sun. The stone was scorched, blackened in places, and the air stank faintly of old ash. Kyle dismounted first. Sarastra didn't follow. She stared up at the ruin with eyes that saw more than stone. "This is where it began," she said finally. "Where I first bled. Where I first broke." He looked at her then, more carefully. The way her shoulders curved inward now as if the memory had weight. The way her voice dulled. Quiet, like speaking too loud might wake something buried beneath the altar stones. "Tell me," he said, not as a demand, as something closer to an offering. She stepped down slowly, her boots sinking into soft earth. She didn't look at him. Her eyes never left the temple. "My consort met me here under the full moon," she said, moving through the weeds like she belonged to the ruin. "He asked for peace, said the rebellion needed a gesture of mercy, that they feared what we were, what I was, that if I showed myself here, vulnerable, he could end the fighting." Kyle followed her, silent. The others stayed behind with the horses, too far to hear, too wise to intrude. "I came alone," she went on. "No guards, no fire in my blood. I stripped my power down to a whisper to make him feel safe." She reached the broken altar and knelt beside it, brushing dirt away from the stone. "But it wasn't peace, it was a trap. They came with chains enchanted in blood magic, cursed iron. They tore my wings from me, one by one, pinned me to this stone and carved my name from the old tongue so I couldn't speak it anymore." Her hands trembled as they stilled over the altar's edge. Kale stood behind her, watching the rise and fall of her back, the tension rippling through her body like coiled steel. "I remember the cold of it," she said. "Not the pain, not the betrayal. Just the cold. Like they took the fire and buried it under stone." She rose slowly and turned to face him. The look in her eyes wasn't defiant or pleading. It was raw, open, something so exposed he almost looked away. Almost. "They thought killing the dragon would make me easier to control," she said, "but it only made me forget how to feel anything else." Kyle didn't speak. He didn't know how to answer that kind of grief. So he stepped closer, slow, unthreatening, until there was almost no space left between them. The ruins surrounded them like a ring of ghosts. But she was warm, still, burning. He reached out, not to comfort, not out of pity, just to touch. The back of his fingers brushed her jaw, slow and steady, and her eyes fluttered once, like the sensation startled her. She didn't move away. She tilted into it. "There's still fire in you," he said. She closed her eyes just for a second, and when she opened them again, they shimmered gold. "I don't know how to carry it anymore," she whispered. "Then let me hold it with you," he said, and his voice was lower now, something darker curling beneath it. The moment stretched long and sharp until her hand found his chest, just over his heart. She didn't press hard, just enough to feel him breathe, just enough to be sure he still did. His hand slid down to her hip, slow, deliberate. No urgency, just contact, connection, the pull of one body answering another, without words or need for explanation. Their foreheads touched, not quite a kiss, not yet. Her breath warmed his mouth, but she didn't lean in. She waited, and he didn't close the space. Whatever hovered there between them, it wasn't ready to burn. They broke apart when the wind changed. Sarastra inhaled sharply, eyes narrowing. Kyle turned toward the scent that carried on the air. Blood and rust and something wrong. The forest rustled, but not with animals. They moved in moments. By the time the first assailant broke the tree line, Kale had drawn his blade and Sarastra's eyes were glowing like coals. Steel clanged. Fire hissed. The bounty hunters came silent and fast, 5 of them, faces masked, weapons laced with runes meant to wound something not quite mortal. Kale took the brunt, moving with brutal grace, every movement efficient. No flourish, just death. Sarastra didn't waste fire. She used her hands, her breath, her speed. She was faster than them, too fast. One lunged at her from behind and Kale called her name without thinking. Too late. The blade slashed across her ribs. She cried out more in rage than pain, and then the air screamed. Flame erupted from her spine, a ring of heat so sudden it knocked Kale back a step. The man who cut her disintegrated mid-scream. When the last of them fell, Sarastra sank to her knees. Blood soaked her side, dark and steady. Kyle reached her in a heartbeat, dropping beside her, hands pressed to the wound. She hissed between her teeth. "It's shallow." "Doesn't matter." His voice came rougher than he intended. "You're bleeding." Her hand caught his wrist. Her fingers, slick and warm, pulled his hand away. "Let me do it." He hesitated, then nodded. She pressed her own palm to the cut and whispered something that didn't belong to this world. Light flickered beneath her skin again, dimmer this time. Not enough. Her breath hitched. She swayed. Kale caught her before she hit the ground. One arm around her shoulders, the other at her knees. She was light, too light, and still too hot. Her head dropped to his chest, and for a moment, he thought she'd gone under again. But her voice rose, quiet and strained. "You'll leave," she said. "Eventually. Like the rest." Kale looked down at her, and for the first time he let something soft show in his eyes. Just enough. Just for her. "I would have left already," he said, "if I wanted to." Her hand curled weakly in his collar. He held her closer, felt her heart beat too fast against his. And as he carried her through the ruins of her past, he knew something had changed that could not be undone. The forest watched them go. Silent. Still. Sated. Chapter 5. Masks in the capital. They reached the outskirts of the capital just before dusk, the sun low and half swallowed by the horizon, bleeding gold through the haze. The road had widened into something more civilized, lined with crooked fence posts and carts drawn by weary horses. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin straight lines, but no scent of warmth clung to it. Only wood, ash, and something faintly metallic beneath. The city loomed ahead, built in layers, like a wound that never fully closed. Kyle had seen it before in other lives, from other gates. He had left blood in its streets, coin on its tables, memories in its bedrolls. But not like this. Not with her beside him. Sarastra sat tall in her saddle, wrapped in a plain wool cloak the color of charcoal, her hair bound beneath a hood. Her dress had been replaced with borrowed leathers stitched at the seams by Elin's hurried hand, but no fabric could disguise the way she moved or the way the air bent slightly around her, as if unsure whether to obey or fear her. She didn't speak as the guards waved them through. The capital didn't recognize exiled queens. No one stopped them. They were just another mercenary band passing through. Faces turned, but no one looked long enough. No one saw her. Kyle stayed close. Closer than necessary. Within the gates, the city unfolded in noise and filth. The stench of humanity thickened, woven with rot, ale, sweat, and the oily tang of merchant spices. Voices layered over one another, shouting, haggling, laughing too loud, crying too soft. Sarastra's nostrils flared once as if the scent of it offended her down to the marrow, but she made no comment. He led them through the side streets away from the main road, weaving through alleys where brickwork leaned in too close and puddles glistened with things not entirely water. They reached the inn by nightfall, a squat stone thing tucked behind a disused tannery, its windows too small to let secrets out. Ren had used it before. The owner asked no questions. Kyle took the top room for them. A single bed, rough-hewn floorboards, no fire in the hearth. The walls were thick, the latch new. He dropped his pack by the door and turned to find her already near the window, watching the city through the glass. "You're too still," he said, unbuckling his belt with practiced ease. "I used to fly above it," she murmured, not turning. "The capital was smaller then, less brick, more bone." He looked at her in the dim light, the way the moon caught the curve of her cheek, the pale hollow of her throat. She looked both ethereal and terribly present, like something pulled between two worlds. She hadn't flinched once since the forest. Not when she bled. Not when he carried her. Not when they crossed into enemy territory. But now, standing behind cracked glass in a stranger's room, she was holding herself too tightly again. Cale crossed the room. Not fast, not slow, just steady. The way he moved in battle, controlled and unyielding. He stopped behind her. Not touching, just near enough that she would feel the presence of him, the weight of him at her back. "You don't have to be her here," he said, voice low. She didn't answer, but her head tilted slightly, her breath catching once before she smoothed it away. "I'm not her anymore," she said softer. "And yet she's all I remember how to be." He raised a hand, hesitated only a moment, then placed it gently on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. His fingers were calloused, scarred, too rough for someone like her. But she leaned into it. Just slightly. Just enough. "I can't promise to keep you safe," he said, "but I'll be damned if I stop trying." A silence bloomed between them, warm and tense. She turned then, slowly, until they stood face to face in the half-light. Her hood had slipped back. Her hair framed her face in dark waves, wild and still damp from the road. He saw it in her eyes before she moved, something shifting, not surrender, but the letting down of armor long kept sealed. She reached for his hand and held it not with desperation, but with a strange, deliberate tenderness. "You said once you believed in monsters," she murmured. "Do you still?" "I do. And if I told you I'm one of them?" "I'd say I already knew." Her eyes searched his face, long and unblinking. She moved closer, barely a whisper's distance between them now. He didn't reach for her, didn't rush it. He waited. Still. Steady. Her hand came to his jaw, slow and measured, her thumb brushing the edge of a scar there. She touched him like he was breakable, which was laughable, considering what she was. But it did something to him anyway, something small and profound. When she kissed him, it wasn't soft, it wasn't desperate. It was a meeting of equal storms. Her mouth caught his with certainty, fire behind it, tempered only by the hesitation that followed. One breath's pause as if to ask, without asking, if he would meet her there. He did. His hand slid into her hair, not to possess, but to anchor. Their bodies pressed together without space, but there was no rush, no frantic hunger. Just heat, just pressure, just the slow unraveling of a thread too long pulled tight. They broke apart only when the need for breath became real. Her forehead rested against his, her eyes closed. His fingers lingered at her waist, unsure of what came next, but unwilling to let go. Her voice was barely audible. "I don't know what this is." "Neither do I," he said. "But it's real." She nodded once, the faintest movement, and stepped away. Not rejection, just breath. Just distance enough to not drown in it. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers laced together in her lap. He moved to the far side of the room, leaned against the wall, and watched her without speaking. The room had grown warm, though the fire was still unlit. They slept that night in the same bed. Not touching, not speaking, just two broken things side by side, breath sinking in the hush between dreams. And though the city groaned beyond the walls and enemies stirred in the dark, and the future burned like a storm on the horizon, Cale knew one thing with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. He would not leave her. Not now. Not ever. Chapter 6. Embers and Echoes. The capital pulsed around them with the rhythm of a living beast, heavy with footsteps, cloaked in smoke, and stitched with whispers. The streets twisted like veins through its rotting heart, and Kale moved through them with a predator's ease, one hand always at the hilt of his blade, the other guiding her close. Sarastra walked beside him, hood drawn, face half-shadowed. To any who passed, she was just another cloaked figure, another forgotten woman trailing behind her armed escort. But Kale could feel the way her presence pulled at the world. People turned to look and didn't know why. Flames in nearby lanterns flickered more wildly when she passed. Dogs refused to bark. Even the air bent just slightly, like something unseen shifted with each step she took. He watched her when she didn't know. He watched the way her eyes moved, fast, sharp, always reading, always wary. There was no room for wonder in her anymore. But there was something softer now, something just beneath the surface. He saw it when she brushed against his arm and didn't pull away, when their hands touched at market stalls and lingered longer than they needed to. They were looking for a name, someone buried in the city's underbelly, a contact of Wren's who had once served a queen and owed a debt to fire. Kale knew the path well enough. Bribed guards, quiet alleys, shadowed taverns where truth cost more than blood. But the city had changed since he last walked it, or maybe it was he who had changed. They found the contact by the river, a man with too many scars and not enough conscience. He spat lies until Sarastra spoke his name in the old tongue, and then his hands trembled as he handed over the map. The key. The warning whispered, with eyes wide as a boy's. The second relic, it turned out, was buried beneath the bones of a drowned temple, hidden in the underworks of the capital, where water never dried and light never reached. They waited until nightfall to go. Kyle watched her prepare, standing at the wash basin with her sleeves rolled back, water slipping over the curve of her arms. Her skin shimmered faintly in the candlelight, not with magic, but memory. The lines of her body, strong and unforgiving, told 1,000 stories she would never speak aloud. He could have looked away, should have, but his gaze held. She felt it. Of course she did. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his in the reflection of the mirror. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them had grown heavier each day, not from absence, but from everything they were beginning to know without needing to say it. He stepped closer. The air between them changed again, thickened. Her breath caught, just a flicker, and his hand moved before thought could stop it. Fingers brushing the edge of her arm, trailing lightly along damp skin. She didn't flinch. She turned toward him, body close, head tilted. Their mouths hovered in that small burning space between a decision and a surrender. But neither crossed the line, and instead she stepped away. Not far, just enough to cool the moment before it caught fire. "Not here," she said. "Not yet." Kale didn't press. He watched her tie her cloak again, the tension in her shoulders tighter now. He said nothing as they left, but the weight of her closeness haunted him more than distance ever had. The underworks of the capital were worse than memory. The tunnels stank of mildew and old blood. The stone dripped with water that never ran clean. Rats scattered at their steps, and the echoes of the city above seemed like the dreams of another world entirely. They moved in silence, only the sound of her breath ahead of him steady but strained. The path narrowed until they reached the place marked on the map, a rusted grate half sunken into the wall, wrapped in vines that should not have grown in darkness. Sarastra reached for it first, but Kyle caught her wrist. He said nothing, just pulled a knife from his belt and cleared the way himself. Her eyes lingered on the gesture as if memorizing it. Inside, the chamber opened like a wound. Once a temple, it was now a cavern of rot and ruin. Its ceiling collapsed, its altar drowned. Water slicked the floor in black pools. The relic was buried beneath it. Sarastra could feel it. She moved toward the altar, eyes closing, hands open, and something in the room answered. A tremor, a whisper, Then fire. It didn't roar. It rose slowly, like breath held too long. It coiled around her fingers, her arms, her throat. Her body arched, spine curving as if something inside her twisted free. Light spilled from her skin, not bright but warm, pulsing, alive. Cale moved to her side instinctively, but a force pushed him back. Not pain, just pressure. A warning. Her eyes opened, gold and blinding. The water began to steam. She fell forward onto her knees, hands braced against the stone. The relic, no larger than a heart, rose from the altar in a glow of red and bronze, and Cale caught it before it hit the floor. The fire vanished and her body slumped. He caught her before she fell. She was burning again, fever hot, her pulse a racing echo beneath her skin. He lifted her into his arms, her weight unfamiliar and somehow intimate. She didn't speak. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her fingers clutching at his shirt like she couldn't tell where the magic ended and the pain began. He carried her all the way back. They said nothing through the streets, through the alleys, through the door of the inn, up the stairs, into the room, onto the bed. He placed her down carefully, brushing damp strands of hair from her face, and watched her eyes flutter open. Dazed, bright, human. Cale. She breathed, barely audible. He stilled. The sound of his name from her lips was quieter than any kiss they hadn't yet shared. She reached for him again, blindly, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. He leaned down, close enough that her breath warmed his cheek, close enough to hear the tremble in hers. "I'm here," he said. She nodded slowly. A wordless answer. Her body relaxed beneath his touch, and he felt the tension bleed from her slowly, inch by inch, until sleep claimed her. He didn't leave, not that night. He sat beside her until dawn, watching the embers flicker in the hearth, listening to the rhythm of her breath. And when she reached for him in her sleep, without knowing, without thought, he let her. His hand found hers in the dark, and he did not let go. Chapter 7. Beneath the ashen sky. The air changed as they rode into the northern reaches, where the sky seemed stretched too thin and the light never quite touched the ground. The roads became less defined, more memory than path, threading through a land that had once belonged to dragons and now belonged to no one. The trees here grew crooked, wind-scoured, their trunks scarred by fire long extinguished. Every hill felt like a grave. Every breeze carried ash. Cale noticed the change in her before she spoke of it. Sarastra had grown quieter, her stillness sharper than silence. She rode with her shoulders drawn tighter, her eyes always fixed ahead, but her thoughts circled elsewhere, somewhere older, darker, deeper. Each mile closer to their destination tugged at her like a hook in her spine. It was in the way she touched the pommel of her saddle too often, the way her lips parted when she looked toward the horizon, as if tasting the ghosts that waited there. They spoke little during the ride. Words would not reach what moved between them now. That night they made camp beneath a rock overhang, shelter from the wind but not the weight of the land pressing down around them. The others slept nearby, curled in their cloaks, but Cale remained awake, tending a fire that seemed too small to warm anything. Sarastra stood just beyond the glow, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes tilted toward the distant mountains. Her face in the half-light looked carved from memory, beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like the edge of something too sharp to name. He approached without sound, the way he always moved when it mattered most. She didn't turn. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice low, steady, "we reach the place where he died." Cale waited. "My former mate," she added. "Barracks." She didn't say the name like it hurt her. She said it like it weighed her down. "I watched his body fall, I watched the pyre burn, I thought that was the end. But some things don't die. Not really. Not when there's something left to want." Cale looked at her then, truly looked. Not just at the woman shaped by loss, but the storm beneath her skin, the ache held in check by breath and will. She wasn't afraid of facing him again, not the man, not the memory, but what it would unearth inside her. what it would ask her to forgive. She finally turned to him, the wind pressing hair across her cheek. Her eyes caught the firelight again, that unnatural gold that always seemed half-remembered from some forgotten myth. "Do you fear me now?" she asked. "No, but you should." He stepped closer. "I've killed gods," she said. "Burned empires. You saw only a fraction of what I am in the tunnels, and still you stayed. I'm still here. You won't always be." He didn't answer that. There was truth in her words. There always was. But he reached out, his hand lifting slowly, pausing just before he touched her cheek. She leaned into it before he could finish the motion, her skin brushing against his palm. Warm. Too warm. Like she hadn't quite cooled from the inside. Her eyes fluttered shut for the space of a breath. "I don't know how to be touched like this," she whispered, "not without burning through it." "Then burn me." She laughed then softly, bitter at the edges, but it faded as quickly as it came. Her other hand rose, curling into the collar of his shirt. The fabric bunched beneath her fingers. She pulled him closer, not with force, but with inevitability. Their mouths met like gravity, not heat. It wasn't rushed. There was no hunger in it. Just pressure. Just presence. A question asked and answered in one slow, soul-deep moment. Her body fit against his in a way that defied armor and instinct. He felt the sharp line of her collarbone, the delicate curve of her waist beneath her cloak. Her breath hitched when his hands found her hips. She didn't push him away. She pressed closer, but the kiss ended before it could become more. She stepped back, head lowered, eyes still half closed. "If I lose myself tomorrow," she said, "if what I find there takes me apart, don't follow me into it. Let me burn alone." He stared at her, jaw tight, hands still aching to pull her back. But he didn't touch her again. "Say something," she whispered. "I won't promise not to follow you," he said, "but I'll promise not to leave." She didn't nod, didn't thank him. She just turned and walked toward her bedroll, her shoulders stiff, her breath uneven. Kyle stayed by the fire. He watched it die slowly, watched the last sparks gutter out against the ash. And even then, he could still feel the warmth of her mouth on his, lingering like the memory of flame. In the dark, they both lay awake, and neither of them reached for the other, but neither slept. Chapter 8. The Betrayer's Grave. The morning broke with no sunrise, only a pallid light that seeped across the sky like breath through cloth. The world was gray, the cold sharper than before, each gust of wind biting like something with teeth. They rode without words, the mountains looming larger as the path narrowed, until even the trees grew quiet, bowed low against the slope as though unwilling to witness what waited above. The wind thinned the higher they climbed, yet the air grew heavier. Cale felt it with every step of his horse, the dense, invisible weight that pressed down the farther they went. His breath shortened. The silence between him and Sarastra had become its own kind of language. She had spoken nothing since waking. Her face was drawn, jaw set tight, and her eyes fixed ahead on the ridge that curved like a broken crown against the sky. The ground flattened near the summit. Charred stone jutted from the earth like the ribs of a buried giant. A circle had once stood here, a ceremonial space carved into the bones of the mountain, but now it lay in ruin, half devoured by time and battle, its center darkened by something older than blood. This was where Varix had fallen. This was where Sarastra had burned him. She dismounted without a word and walked forward. Her feet slow, her steps soundless over the gravel. Kyle followed, further behind than usual. She needed space, though he felt it like a tearing inside him. She stopped at the center of the ruin where the earth still bore the faint marks of wings. The stone had cracked there in a perfect circle, scorched black and glass smooth in places. She knelt, placing her palm to it. Cale watched her shoulders rise, then fall. Her head bowed. Her lips moved, though no sound came. The wind caught her hair, pulling strands loose from the braid she'd worn since morning. Her cloak wrapped around her limbs like a shroud, and he could almost imagine her as she had once been, queen, dragon, fire incarnate, before the world had turned against her. Then the ground shuddered. He stepped forward instinctively, but her hand lifted without turning. Wait. She remained still, even as the wind surged, even as the air thickened with heat that came not from above, but from below. The cracks in the earth began to glow, faint lines of ember snaking outward from her fingertips. The ruin awakened beneath her touch, and then he heard it. A voice soft at first, almost beautiful, rising from the stone like breath. Not a man's voice, not quite. It slithered rather than spoke, laced with silk and rot. Sarastra? She flinched. Kyle saw it. Barely. A tiny spasm in her spine, quickly crushed. The light beneath her grew stronger. Shapes began to form in the air, smoke coiling into memory, into muscle and gold, into the rough outline of a man who once wore a dragon's face. The apparition flickered in and out, too fluid for form, too solid for shadow. His face was half beauty, half burned, the smile exactly as Kale had imagined from her stories. Cruel, charming, empty. Kale's hand moved to his sword. The instinct to shield her, to strike, to do something, gnawed at him. But she stood and he froze. Sarastra stepped forward, fire flickering around her like breath through a dying flame. Her eyes were gold, no longer human. The specter of Varric spoke again, and though Kale couldn't make out the words, he saw how they landed, like hooks in her flesh. She shook once. Her mouth opened, and for the first time in weeks, Kyle heard her scream. But it wasn't fear, it was fury. The flames erupted, not wild, but controlled, wrapping her in light, her hair lifted by wind that came from nowhere, her body arching with the force of release. Her hands spread as if she meant to tear the ghost from the air itself. Her voice shattered into the wind, shouting words not meant for human tongues. The ghost reeled, its form collapsing inward, writhing. But still it whispered, still it pulled at her, and then it reached for her. Kale was at her side before he could think. The heat seared his skin, but he didn't stop. He grabbed her shoulder, anchoring her, grounding her, her back arched against him, the fire threatening to swallow them both. He wrapped his arms around her, pressing his chest to her spine, and spoke against her ear. Not in command, not in fear, but in something stronger than either. A promise. A name. Her name. She collapsed into him. The ghost shattered. The flames withdrew into her skin like water retreating from shore. Her body went limp in his arms, breath coming in quick, sharp bursts. He held her tighter, one hand around her waist, the other at her sternum, feeling the frantic hammer of her heart. They sank to the ground together. He stayed like that for what felt like hours, the scent of fire still clinging to the air, the echo of her power humming through the stone. She didn't speak, didn't move, but she didn't pull away either. When her breathing slowed, she turned slightly, just enough for their faces to be close, for her forehead to press against his. Her fingers found his hand, twined through it, held tight. I thought he still had a piece of me, she whispered. But he didn't. It was only memory. Kale said nothing. Words felt too small for what had just happened. She leaned into him fully then, her mouth brushing his cheek, soft and tired. Her lips hovered near his jaw. He turned his head just slightly, and her lips found his. It was not a kiss of fire, not like before. It was deeper, slower. Not hunger, need, not heat. Gravity. Her fingers curled in his shirt as her mouth moved over his. His arms circled her, drawing her closer until there was no space left between them. Only breath, only heartbeats. They didn't undress, they didn't speak, and they simply held each other as the embers cooled, as the mountain grew quiet again, as the past finally let her go. And when they parted just enough to breathe, she laid her head against his shoulder, her body tucked beneath his like something that had always belonged there. Cale rested his cheek against her hair, eyes open, watching the sky turn dark above them. The stars returned one by one, and for the first time neither of them dreamed of fire. Chapter 9. Queen of Ash. The return to the capital was not announced by trumpet or banner, but by silence. A strange, tight-laced stillness clung to the streets like breath caught in the throat. The sky hung low, a ceiling of dull iron, and the air carried a weight that had nothing to do with weather. Even the guards at the outer post barely looked at the travelers who passed them. They were tired, worn down, waiting for something they couldn't name. Cale led the way on foot now, his blade hidden beneath a worn cloak, his face shadowed by the hood. Behind him, Sarastra walked as if the road belonged to her. She no longer disguised the way she moved, no longer dulled the fire in her gaze. The second relic hung from the chain at her neck, pulsing faintly like a second heartbeat. The first remained tucked beneath her leathers, but Cale could feel both as surely as he felt his own breath. They had changed her, not by making her less human, but by revealing the parts of her that had never been. They passed unnoticed through the crowded lower districts. Wordless stares followed them, but none dared speak. Cale kept his hand close to his belt, though it was no longer instinct that made him protective. It was something deeper, something that twisted in his gut every time he looked at her and saw the storm gathering behind her eyes. At the inn, the crew waited, packed and tense. Ren paced to the length of the room while Elin sharpened a blade with trembling fingers. They rose when Sarastra entered, and no one asked what had happened on the mountain. They could all feel it. Something had shifted, and Sarastra didn't give orders. She didn't need to. She simply said she was ready. Cale watched her from the window while she stood before the cracked mirror. She didn't check her hair, didn't adjust her armor. She stared at her reflection like it was a stranger, or a version of herself she hadn't seen in centuries. Her fingers brushed the relic at her neck once, but she made no move to hide it. Cale approached slowly, his footsteps soft against the warped floorboards. He stopped behind her, close but not quite touching. Her gaze met his in the mirror. And for a moment nothing else existed, not the city, not the fight waiting beyond the palace gates. Only this, the echo of their breath between them, the silent gravity that kept pulling them back to each other. She turned. Her fingers rose to the collar of his shirt. Slowly, deliberately, she smoothed it, as if trying to remember the gesture. His hand caught her wrist, not to stop her, but to keep her there, to feel the thrum of her pulse under his thumb. "I won't wear a crown," she said, "not like before." "You won't need one," he answered. The palace loomed at the city's highest point, stone dark as soot, and lined with banners that had long ceased to inspire. The path there wound through courtyards Cale remembered only in fragments. Blood in the fountains, fire on the ramparts. This time there was no army, no siege, no charge through broken gates. Only one woman walking with purpose, fire under her skin, and the memory of wings in every step. The guards at the gate stepped aside before she spoke. Something in their eyes said they'd heard the stories, maybe even dreamed them. Sarastra said nothing. She simply passed through. The throne room had once been her heart. Now it sat hollow. The banners had changed, the colors shifted, but the bones remained the same. Pillars carved with dragons, a dais lined with charred obsidian, and the throne, hers, once, still cold, still waiting. Kalira stood before it, dressed in silver, flanked by knights who looked more decoration than protection. Her smile was sharp, practiced, but her hands betrayed her. Too still, too tense. She didn't greet Sarastra as queen. She didn't greet her at all. "You've come to die," Kalira said finally. Sarastra stepped forward, and the fire followed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The relics around her neck burned brighter, and the floor beneath her began to glow with the same molten light Cale had seen on the mountain. The air turned thick, the walls shivered, and the guards who stood near Kalira shifted back with wide eyes. "This throne," Sarastra said, was not yours to take, and I am not here to beg it back. Kyle stood beside her now. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough to feel the power rolling off her like waves. His jaw clenched. Every muscle in his body was ready to draw, to defend. But he didn't move. This wasn't his battle, and it was hers. Kalira reached for the blade at her hip, but before the steel left the sheath, the flames erupted. Not wild, not chaotic, controlled, terrifying, beautiful. The relics on Sarastra's chest flared like stars, and behind her, shadowed in light, barely seen, wings formed. Not solid, not smoke, a memory made real. She stepped forward and the ground obeyed her. The throne behind Kalira cracked down the center. The banners burned without touch. Kalira screamed. It was not pain that made it ugly, it was fear. She dropped the blade and ran. Kyle didn't chase her, neither did Sarastra. She turned instead to the throne and stood before it in silence. She didn't sit, didn't touch it. She only looked at it, long and still, until the fire faded from her eyes. And then she turned away. Kyle followed. The walk back to the inn was quiet. No one stopped them. No one dared. By the time they reached the door, her steps had slowed. Her hand brushed his arm once, light as breath. He turned to her, and she looked up at him. Not as queen, not as fire made flesh, but as the woman who had once wept in his arms on a mountain of ghosts. "I don't want the throne," she said. "I just wanted to know I could take it back." "You can," he answered. "You did." That night they did not sleep in separate beds. They did not wait for the silence to pass. Their clothes fell away like old lies. Their mouths found each other not with hunger, but with reverence. Every touch was slow, certain, no fire, no frenzy, just heat, just need, just the weight of time unraveling between them. Her hands traced the lines of his back like memory. His lips found the hollow of her throat like prayer. And when their bodies joined, it was not the claiming of a crown, but the surrender of everything they had once feared to want. They moved together through the night, and when sleep finally came, it was wrapped in breath and skin, and the knowledge that nothing had been stolen, only delayed. The queen did not return to her throne. She returned to him. Chapter 10. The Last Ember. The sun rose without color, a pale disk hidden behind low clouds. The capital lay hushed beneath it, a city not yet waking, holding its breath as if uncertain whether peace had been restored or merely paused. In the upper chamber of the inn, the world had already shifted. Kale woke first, though he didn't move. Her body lay curled against his, bare skin against his chest, her breath soft against his throat. The sheets were twisted around their legs, and the heat between them hadn't faded through the night. His arm was draped across her back, fingers splayed over her spine. Her warmth wasn't human. It never had been. But it had become something familiar. Something he no longer wanted to live without. She stirred slowly, her breath deepening. Her hand slid up his ribs, resting over his heart. And when her eyes opened, they didn't flash or burn. They looked tired, grounded, human. They didn't speak, there was no need. She sat up after a time, gathering the sheet around her, and walked to the window. The city stretched below her, quieter now, but still scarred. The throne she had reclaimed remained empty. Word had spread. The usurper had fled. Her name had returned to the mouths of those who once feared to speak it aloud. But she had made no claim to rule. She had no crown, no armies. Only fire and memory, and a man who looked at her like she had never fallen at all. Kale rose behind her, wrapping the blanket around his waist, watching her silhouette against the light. She stood with her hands braced on the windowsill, hair loose down her back, the relics gone from her neck. He hadn't seen her take them off, but now they rested on the small table beside the bed, their glow dimmed. Quiet. "I don't think I was meant to stay here," she said finally. Her voice was soft, but not uncertain. Kyle came to stand behind her. His hands found her hips, bare beneath the sheet. She leaned back into him just slightly. This place was never home, she continued. It was only a cage dressed in power. He said nothing, only pressed a kiss to her shoulder. She shivered at the touch, not from cold, but from the quiet ache of knowing. I have my power now, she said, not all of it, but enough to choose. He rested his chin on her shoulder, arms sliding around her waist. And what do you choose? She turned in his arms then, her face unreadable in the pale light. Her hand came up to his cheek, fingers tracing the stubble along his jaw. When she spoke, her voice was steadier. Not a throne, not a kingdom, not revenge, just this, just you, just freedom. Cale's throat tightened. He didn't answer, only held her closer. They left the capital without ceremony. No guards, no banners, no proclamations. The city watched them go, quiet and confused. Some bowed, some turned away, but no one stopped them. The road beyond the wall stretched wide and open, winding into hills still dusted in ash and gold. The mountains rose behind them, distant now, their secrets burned clean. Ahead lay only sky and time. She rode beside him, no longer veiled, no longer hidden. The wind caught her hair, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw them again. Wings, vast and shadowed, unfurling behind her like a memory being remade. They stopped near dusk where the cliffs met the sea. The waves below crashed against stone, loud and relentless. The wind was colder here, carrying salt and the ghosts of things once lost. She stood near the edge, her cloak billowing around her, eyes fixed on the horizon. Kyle stayed back, watching her from the rise. Then she turned to him. There was something final in her expression. Not sorrow, not farewell, just truth. She stepped toward him, slow and barefoot across the rocks. When she reached him, her hands slid beneath his cloak, fingers curling against his chest. He kissed her, once, soft, deep, filled with everything they hadn't said. She pulled back just enough to breathe, her forehead resting against his. Whatever we were, she said, whatever we became, it was real. It still is. She smiled, small, fierce. Then she stepped away and let the cloak fall. Kel didn't speak. He only watched as she turned to face the sea, arms rising, palms open. The wind changed. Light burst from her skin, soft at first, then brighter, bolder, a golden blaze threading through her limbs. Her hair lifted, her body arching slightly as if something within her had finally loosened its grip. The fire didn't consume her this time. It shaped her. It crowned her. It made her whole. And then they appeared. Wings, not illusions, not shadows, but real. Vast. Iridescent black streaked with veins of molten gold. They unfurled slowly, majestically, casting the cliffs in a warm, shifting glow. The wind howled louder, but she stood steady in it. Eyes closed, mouth parted as if taking in the first full breath of her true self in 1,000 years. Kyle stepped forward until he stood just behind her. His hand found hers. She didn't look at him, but her fingers twined with his. For a moment, nothing moved. Then she turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. I could fly, she whispered. I could go where no one would follow. I know. But I won't, she said, not alone. And then she folded her wings, not to vanish, not to flee, but to stay. She turned fully and stepped into his arms. They stood there at the edge of the world, wrapped in wind and firelight. Two broken creatures who had chosen not to burn alone. No crown, no throne, no titles, only the last ember of something lost and the beginning of something new.